Hello and welcome to Final Justice. I'm John Walsh. Growing up is never easy. It's even tougher when you're coming of age under the watchful eye of an abusive father and a submissive mother. Growing up in that troubled environment, Larry Donald George never stood a chance of making it. He learned only one lesson: you've got to be tough to survive. Sadly, innocent victims would wander into George's path and discover just how tough he could be.
Get the showers and get in uniform. Get up to CO's office.
George never had much direction in his life until he joined the U.S. Army. They stationed the Alabama native in Germany, where he was not a model soldier.
Based on your past court-martial convictions, it is my recommendation that you be reduced in rank and discharged from the United States Army.
During his military career, George was careless and disobedient, with little regard for authority. He left the Army in November 1986, but he took away skills he would carry with him for years. George and his wife, Geraldine, returned to Alabama, but he was not happy there. He took his anger out on her.
You don't ask me any questions, you hear? You do what I tell you.
Out of the 5 years that we was really married, the happiest day was when I left him and got in my own place.
The couple separated, and Geraldine wanted a divorce, but George kept close tabs on her activities. February 12, 1988, he headed to Talladega, Alabama, to find Geraldine. She ran to a neighbor for protection.
Janice, call the police. Larry's outside with the gun.
First, George shot Janice Morris, the neighbor. Then he went after Geraldine. His next bullet tore through her arm, then severed her spine. George stopped Ralph Swain, the neighbor's fiancé, with a single bullet to the head. Both Janice and Ralph were murdered, victims of Larry George's sick obsession. Geraldine was more fortunate, but her injuries had left her paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair. Looking back, she bore the guilt for her husband's cruelty.
I blame myself. No, not totally. I leave 75% of it for him.
Only Larry George didn't stick around to accept his responsibility or his punishment. Law enforcement searched for him for more than a year, but he seemed to have disappeared.
America's Most Wanted.
In April 1989, America's Most Wanted joined the manhunt, but still no results. June 17, 1990, police watched George's third profile, and so did millions of television viewers. A flurry of calls to the hotline was about to spark an intense manhunt.
7-Eleven owner in Delaware, and this is one of a common customer, George is.
Police tracked George to Wilmington, Delaware. A clerk confirmed that he was a regular at the 7-Eleven convenience store.
It looks like a loose curl. That's real oily. I remember him playing lottery a few times, but usually I don't think he comes in during the day.
Neighborhood residents directed a Wilmington Police Department SWAT team to a nearby field.
We took it slow. We were wary of booby traps, things like that from this gentleman's military training.
There they found the remains of a makeshift tent, but no sign of its owner. George had built himself a quiet haven in the woods, but he'd abandoned it and moved on. Then local residents led police to a rundown house in the city, and the heat was on. Armed and ready to take the fugitive down, police surrounded the house, but when they stormed in, George had vanished.
Next, two cops go fishing for one of America's most wanting to waste.
Larry Donald George was one of the most elusive fugitives America's Most Wanted ever chased. He was profiled every year for 5 years. Dozens of tips poured in, but each time George managed to stay one step ahead of the law until April of 1994. A caller provided a new lead that broke the case wide open.
So as we were walking up, we heard the radio on and saw a television right next to the radio, and some tea was brewing in a pan.
This gasoline-powered generator made it possible. George had all the comforts of home, including a stash of sweets, video games, even a cellular phone.
With all that equipment here, it really surprised us, and we knew there had to be a lot more.
There was. George wasn't just battling the wilderness. He was prepared to fight human foes as well. His campsite concealed an arsenal, with enough firepower for a small army. But there was even more to come. Police found an underground hideout stocked with additional supplies and weapons, including this spear gun.
Get a map of the Wilmington Industrial Park, please.
Based on their discovery, detectives Quentin Watson and Bruce Pinkett planned to search the total area of the Wilmington Industrial Park. But first, the detectives wanted a closer look at the territory. Fishing rods in hand, they decided to go undercover.
The minute I saw him out of the corner of my eye, I tried to stay calm, and I told Detective Watson, don't turn around too quickly. Someone's coming up from your right hand, over your right hand shoulder.
That someone turned out to be Larry Donald George. He asked the startled detectives if they planned on going fishing.
We said, yeah. What kind of fish? What kind of good catches are here? And he said, catfish, and he started to show us his catch for the day.
Watson and Pinkett wanted to land their own catch, but George struggled as the detectives tried to handcuff him. They shoved him into the river, and he waded off. As the detectives called for backup, George hid in a rusty tugboat, but his run was finally over.
At that time, we also had a helicopter that was coming down lower and lower to the water, making a lot of noise. So he really couldn't think that clearly, and finally he just gave up.
The police were waiting for George on shore. So was a camera crew, watching as officers hauled him in.
They were giving Mr. George instructions on what to do. Put your hands up. Throw your pants down. He threw his pants in front of him, just to make sure for officer safety, so he didn't have any weapons.
George came out of the river, but he was still in hot water. After 6 years on the run, he headed back to civilization to receive final justice.
They need to face it and experience some of the pain. He done all of this, and I need to be strong and show him I'm still here, and I'm still me, and you're not gonna hurt me no more.
Detectives Pinkett and Watson escorted George from Delaware back to Talladega, Alabama. On November 14th, 1994, George was brought to the Talladega courthouse, charged with attempted murder and 2 counts of capital murder. Geraldine prepared herself to testify against him.
A little shocking feeling went through me, like this is it. It's like it was just a wake up. This is reality now. You don't have to think, you don't see pictures. This is reality.
Prosecutor Robert Rumsey headed into court with a lot of confidence. He knew the case against George would be hard to beat.
Even though you had 2 dead people, you had a victim that could say, he fired the shot coming into the apartment, he pointed the gun at me, and he shot me.
For Geraldine, this was payback time. A bullet from Larry George's gun had paralyzed her legs, but not her heart. She turned her own weapons on George. Determination, courage, and the truth.
Inside, my heart was just skipping all kind of beats. But I just never let him know I was afraid.
The defense called no witnesses of their own. The trial was over after only 3 days. The jury took less than an hour to return their verdict. Guilty on all counts. They sentenced George to death. For Geraldine, it was a long-awaited victory over the man who had tormented her.
I wanted to let him know he didn't break me. He might have hurt me, but he wasn't gonna break me. He took their life without them having a choice. Now they're gonna take his without him having a choice.
Larry Donald George now sits on Alabama's death row. He will continue to try to avoid final justice by appealing his sentence. But for Geraldine, it's as though her life is just beginning.
In my family, I had a lot of strong support to move on, be strong, because I'm still here, thank God. I still got my mind to move on as if it just never did exist.
Next,